T-minus 30 seconds. T-minus 20 seconds. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
I don't have to tell you things are bad. Everybody knows things are bad. It's a depression. Everybody's out of work or scared of losing their job. The dollar buys a nickel's worth. Banks are going bust. Shopkeepers keep a gun under the counter. Punks are running wild in the street, and there's nobody anywhere who seems to know what to do, and there's no end to it. We know the air is unfit to breathe, and our food is unfit to eat. We sit watching our TVs while some local newscaster tells us that today we had 15 homicides and 63 violent crimes, as if that's the way it's supposed to be. We know things are bad, worse than bad. They're crazy. It's like everything everywhere is going crazy, so we don't go out anymore. We sit in the house, and slowly the world we're living in is getting smaller, and all we say is, please, at least leave us alone in our living rooms. Let me have my toaster and my TV and my steel-belted radios, and I won't say anything. Just leave us alone. Well, I'm not going to leave you alone. I want you to get mad. I don't want you to protest. I don't want you to riot. I don't want you to write to your congressman because I wouldn't know what to tell you to write. I don't know what to do about the depression and the inflation and the Russians and the crime in the street. All I know is that first, you've got to get mad. You've got to say, I'm a human being. My life has value.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody, and welcome to Global Watchman News. My name is Laurie Swan. I hope you guys are all doing well. If you're in the live chat, we do ask you to keep it family friendly. There will be moderators in there to make sure that we stay within the terms of service put forth to us by the platforms we're utilizing tonight. If you're new to the channel, welcome. Take a minute, hit that subscribe button, hit that bell so you know when we go live. So, Ernie, how you doing?
I'm tired, but I'm alive, kicking, and blessed. How about yourself?
Same thing. Same thing. Yep, just trudging on here. Just, you know. So we are doing a special Friday night broadcast, and this has been, I met this gentleman a couple of years ago when I was co-hosting with Sean Carone over on the Awakening Liberty show, and did a fantastic interview. I had him scheduled to appear with us about a year ago, and we got a 90-day suspension here on YouTube. So we've been playing message tag for a while. I'm speaking to you about the author Gary Wayne of the Genesis 6 conspiracy. I'm going to read a little bit here before I introduce them and bring them on the panel, but it says, there are giants among us passing largely unnoticed, intent on carrying out a secret plan to enslave all humanity. They may not look like giants today, but their bloodlines extend all the way back to the Nephilim, the offspring of angels who mated with human women described in Genesis 6, when giants roamed the land. Gary Wayne is author of the Genesis 6 Conspiracy, How Secret Societies and the Descendants of the Giants Plan to Enslave Humanity, humankind. Details the role of modern-day Nephilim in Satan's plan to install the Antichrist at the end of days. Please welcome to the panel author Gary Wayne.
Well, thank you for inviting me, and so happy to guest on your podcast, and looking forward to the conversation tonight.
We are as well. Ernie and I, along with our chatters and our most recent guest, have been kind of talking about the giants, talking about the evidence that has been brought to, archaeological evidence of the existence of giants.
Yeah, there's a lot that's going on out there today. It doesn't necessarily make mainstream media or news or things like that, and they try and sort of shuffle all of those things off to the sides because it doesn't fit a general narrative. So there's not a whole lot that's going on in science today, whether it's archaeology or other sciences, that is permitted to sort of change the narrative or change their philosophical view on how things ought to be. So it's always, I have to be alert to notice what is actually being discovered out there these days, and then how that connects in, and then you have to remember where you saw it because it may not be there for long.
Exactly. There was a show on, I believe it was the History Channel, or it was one of the cable channels networks a few years back, and it was talking about how they were going and they were digging up the giant bones. They found a lot of it in Ohio and in Indiana. Yep. And not to my surprise, the show didn't last very long. It was pulled off of the network, I think, within the first season.
Yeah. And again, because once they start to get to a level where they don't want mass education on some of this stuff, they're going to try and to make it go away. And what's interesting about, and I'm not quite sure which show that you're referring to, but there was one by two brothers that was going on, and it looked like it might be interesting. But I know there was a couple other upstarts as well.
Yeah, I think that's what I was talking about, the two brothers.
Yeah. But there's a common connection that happens, and there's also a link that's you can get, and it links you into old newspaper stories, and that's actually the name of the link. And people want to know if they're interested in this, to get a hold of me through my website, click contact the author and say, where's that link on these old newspaper stories, and I'll send it to you. What it does is it reports in the newspapers all of these giants that were discovered from about 1850 to about 1950 or so. Mostly in North America, these newspapers, but there's a few other ones in Mexico and in Europe. And they're describing bones. Some of them are 7 feet tall, some of them are 9, some of them are 16, some of them are bigger. That in terms of the length that they estimated that the skeleton was. And so two things always happened. One is that they called in the Smithsonian and the bones went directly there, or they called in the local university and they collected the bones, and then they sent the bones to the Smithsonian, and then the paper trail dies and they're never heard of again. And one ought not to find that too surprising, because the Smithsonian Institute was founded through money by a fellow by the name of James Smithson, who was a Rosicrucian of the Royal Society. And so they've controlled that information since their founding in 1662. So this is just the general thing that sort of goes on. They want to keep the hidden history hidden, and they want to control that information until they're ready to come out with whatever and however and how much that they want to provide. As they start to move towards a global government, they're going to start to control this in a little different fashion. I think they're going to give us parts of the equation, but not all of it, and they won't really tell us actually who the players are that they're talking about.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I think the show was America Unearthed, if anybody's interested. I believe that was the name of it, on the History Channel. And yes, it's interesting. The Smithsonian and the Vatican both have histories of taking things that first off, don't belong to them. Secondly, of burying them literally to where they're lost in the shuffle, and completely denying their existence at all once they get these things.
Yeah, and and as you mentioned, there's two groups that tend to hoard most of that information, and it's all linked with. I would put the Smithsonian in with the Royal Society as a connected organization, and the Vatican, and both are using that information for their own purposes and not revealing much of it. So they just sort of get stored. But there's a long history of these bones being recovered, and even those citations are difficult to get. They just didn't just disappear in the time of the Bible. We have, as you said, sites that are discovered all over North America, and they've been, discovering bones and associated with elongated skulls with those bones, and seemingly a red-haired variety, just as you're getting the same kind of skulls that have been discovered down in South America, and that's the same sort of color of hair that the Rephaim and the Nephilim had, the Nephilim being antediluvian, Rephaim tending to be more post-diluvian after the flood, and that it lines up perfectly with the type of the skulls and the hair coloring. So, basically, if you look at giants after the flood, you've got kind of four groups of Indo-Aryans as they're sort of divided up and into. And one of them has like the Datanu of the Ugaritic text, or the Tuatha De Danann, and or the Scythians, as other people might know them as. And they had blonde hair and blue eyes and red hair and hazel eyes. And they sort of dominated most of the sort of giant accountings after the flood, but there's also a dark-haired variety of the Aryan, so that Nimrod would be sort of depicted as one of them. You have Gilgamesh, you have the Syrian kings, you have the heroes that are post-diluvian from Zeus after the flood in places like Crete and south of, the southern part of the Greek Empire and into Asia Minor. So, but it's amazing, though, that it's this more dominant version of the red-haired ones that seem to have spread and migrated, sometime after probably they're pushed out of the Middle East into South America and North America.
Right. And I was just pulling up. So in Genesis chapter 6, it goes and it starts out, it says, "And it came to pass when man began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose." And it says that then in these generations of Noah was just a man; he was perfect in his generations. A lot of people have come to the conclusion, because it says there were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came unto the daughters of man, and they bare children unto them, and same became mighty men, which are old men of renown. Now, you mentioned a couple of the men of renown. They were the pharaohs, they were the leaders, the kings, and stuff like that. But let's start with Noah. So the Bible says that God had to send down the flood, basically to cleanse the earth because of the DNA manipulation that was going on, which caused these Nephilim, or these giants, to be on the earth, along with other things, along with the human animal hybrids that were here. There was just a lot of things that needed to be cleansed. But it got through somehow the flood. And was that through Noah's daughter-in-law?
Well, there's obviously some theories as to how this sort of happens. I basically sort of classify things into about three different buckets on that. What we do know for sure is that it says, and then again after that. So that could be again after the Mount Hermon creation, or it could be again after the flood, and we don't know which. What we do know is giants show up both before the flood, as generally as the Nephilim, and biblically generally as the Rephaim after the flood. So the three buckets that I look at are, one is the third bucket, and that's kind of my least preferred bucket, is that it's somehow with people on the ark or somehow on the ark. So you've got different stories out there from polytheism, like King Og out of Jewish mysticism, for example, as being a stowaway or hanging on the ark. You also have a similar one that was in the last Noah movie about Tubal-Cain being a stowaway. Some people think all of the people on the ark are giants. Some people just think Ham was a giant. Some people think it's the daughters that were providing the gene that crosses the flood. That's possible, and because we don't have a smoking gun verse as to how giants show up after the flood, it's a possibility. It's, for me, it's the least my least preferred option, and I don't rule any of the options out. The second way is how they survive is somehow through the help of fallen angels, either in the earth, off the earth, on another ark, and that's generally the most common one for giant survival. Just as you have in the Epic of Gilgamesh, you have Utnapishtim, or Zayas-Zudra as he's called, and he's also got a couple other names in different translations. But he and his whole family are provided an ark. He doesn't have to make it like Noah did. And it's a story that's very similar to the Noah story, except that Utnapishtim is 2/3 God and 1/3 human. He's the archetypical warrior king. He's a Nephilim of the antediluvian epoch, and he and his whole family survive into the post-diluvian epoch. Also within the Epic of Gilgamesh, though, you have the creation of Gilgamesh by the fertility goddess Nin-Sun in some translations, and through Lugalbanda, his father, king of Uruk. And so it's from a goddess and a male, as opposed to the inverse, was generally how people imagine Nephilim or Rephaim being created. And he's created after the flood, so it's like a second incursion. He's also 2/3 God, 1/3 human, as is Enkidu or Enkidu, again, different transliteration of the same name, who is created to offset the evil of Uruk. That's in the Epic of Gilgamesh. And you get similar accounting. I won't go through all the different ones. I'll give one more just so that people understand what I'm talking about. You've got the Greek Noah, which is Deucalion, and his wife Pyrrha are survivors on an ark in the Greek mythos. And Deucalion is the son of Prometheus. Now, Prometheus can be looked at as a giant hero, and he's also looked upon as a titan. So there's probably one of each, but either way, Deucalion is the son of Prometheus, and that makes him a giant. What's
interesting is growing up, I think we all in our history classes, we learned about the Greek, the Greek gods. We learned about the Roman gods. It wasn't until I was an adult and started doing this kind of research that I found out that they're not myths at all.
No, they're not. They're based on history, and most people, in countries, whether it's the Greeks or wherever, they get rather insulted, and rightfully so, if you call it a myth. Just as if you talk to First Nations in North America about their history of giants and little people and all sorts of other beings in their history, that would be considered an insult to them as well. So we ought to, I think the elitists ought to be a little bit more respectful of that, and recognize that it may not be 100% accurate, but there's a lot of accuracy that is in those mythologies.
Right. Well, the history that we learn here in the West is so much different than the history that they learn in the East.
Oh, yeah. I think it's completely different, not nearly as sanitized for sure. So,
well, we are under control of a group of people that wants to keep everything oppressed and keep the level of knowledge at a minimum.
Knowledge
And
is
those
power.
who,
So if they can
right.
keep us dumbed down and not question these things. I know
Yeah.
when I was back when I started this research, I came across the Sumerians. And the Sumerians, they talk about the giants survived the flood by going into the earth.
Yeah.
I mean, that's
Yeah.
why we see those mountainous structures that are depicting giants of old.
Matter of
I
fact, I'm
mean,
going to
we
pull that
just
up.
talked about it the other night. I was going to ask you if you can do that.
I'm going to play it in the background for us as we're talking here. I'm not going to put the sound on, but I'll just kind of play it so you guys can take a look at these things that is, yeah, it's going to blow your mind when you look at these things. Because now, hold on a second. Before I start this, I just want to put up on the screen. We're not talking about people that were 6, 7, 8 foot. We're talking about some that were as tall as 36 feet.
Yeah, or maybe even larger. And I think the giants before the flood were larger than the ones after the flood.
Because of the atmosphere, right?
Maybe not. It could be some sort of change. So the third bucket, my most preferred, which sort of fits best biblically and with other sort of, I think, research that's out there, would be a second incursion, although I'm still open to the other possibilities. If you have giants after the flood that are smaller than the ones before the flood, and they have a fertility issue, which is a big issue for these giants after the flood. And as an example of that, you've got the terrible ones that are talked about in the Bible, in book of Ezekiel and in the book of Isaiah. And these ones are the strong ones that are called the terrible ones. And these are the ones that are in the sides of the abyss after they die in their cells because of the terrible things that they did on the earth. I don't want to get too far down that lane, but that's the erit is the Hebrew word, and it's defined and as like the eritim as being the plural of that, and they had trouble having children and had a fertility issue. And I think that's why, a second incursion answers a lot more questions in terms of why they're smaller, because there's something that's been changed. There's another incursion by what I call the offspring gods. So if you look at what happens before the flood, you would have the parent gods. And when I talk about a parent god, I'm talking about, let's say in the Greek mythology, Gaia and Kronos. An offspring god is like Zeus. And if you move that over to the Canaanite pantheon, you could have El as the parent god of Baal. And in the Sumerian pantheon, you have Anu as the parent god, male. And Tiamat's another one that's on that list as a female goddess. And then Enlil and Enki are our offspring gods. So typically you see these offspring gods ruling after the flood. And so what I think is going on there is you have the parent gods who created giants before the flood. They're sent off to the abyss. And then there's some form of sort of restriction that's put on these giants because they're not as big. They don't have as much other power. And I think there's a bit of a restriction that's put on, and they have a reproductive issue. But gods like the Baalim, who create the Raphaim of the Ugarit, for example, or for Zeus, who's going to create after the flood Hercules, or Perseus, or Cadmus, or the you get sort of the idea that this is happening in many, many cultures around the world. But those gods no longer walked after a period of time with the humans after the flood. So I think they went to the abyss as well. So I tend to look at the smaller size of the giants as being sort of an extension of this is a recreation, and they're not permitted to be quite as powerful. So 20 to 40 feet would be sort of the average size that people would speculate the giants are before the flood. Some people say they were larger, and they like to quote the book of Enoch out of the Aramaic version, where it says the Nephilim were 150 cubits. The Ethiopian version, which is a little bit longer and has a few more chapters in it, actually doesn't use the word cubit. It has the word El. But if it was a cubit, they'd be at least 450 feet tall and bigger, because they would have been measured on a 21-inch cubit, as Josephus said the giants were measured on. So I don't think they were that big. I think they're described, you've got Amorites, which are a hybrid group of people after the flood that are described as being like the cedars of Bashan, and they could be 40 feet around and 100 feet high, but that's a simile, so it's not an exact measurement. But what it does tell you is that they were incredibly wide, as in stout, as you get a lot of words that go back describing the giants in the Bible back to a stout, like as and azaz means strong. And that's because they had a 3-to-1 height they had a 2-to-1 height to width ratio compared to humans 3-to-1 height to width ratio. So they were very, very wide as well. Gilgamesh, who I mentioned earlier, as an example to the offsetting size or the smaller size after the flood, he was documented in the Ugaritic epic of Gilgamesh and in the Sumerian epic of Gilgamesh as being 11 cubits tall, and he was the king of Uruk. So you'd measure him 21 inches. That would make him 19 feet tall. He was 4 cubits wide, so that would have made him 7 feet wide. Now, when we look at Og's bed, he was sleeping in a bed that was 9 cubits and 4 cubits wide. And again, king of the Rephaim in the Mount Hermon area, living out of Edrei and Ashtaroth. He would have been measured on a royal cubit as well. So if you look at him, that coming out to being 16 feet in length and 7 feet in width, he's not quite as big as Gilgamesh, and he'd be shorter. So he'd be, say, 15 feet tall, 14 to 15 feet tall, and the bed was also 4 cubits. So he would have been, 5 feet wide, maybe 6 feet wide at the maximum, but he would have had that similar height to width ratio that the giants had, but again, smaller. And so Goliath, 400 years later, is 6 cubits and a span, and that's going to range him, if you use an 18-inch cubit, from 9 feet 9 inches to the 21-inch cubits to 11 foot 3 inches. And he was the king of the Gittites, king of Gas. So I think he would have been measured on the larger level. So these just weren't 6 foot tall people. It wasn't 7 feet tall. These were giants. And because they had that fertility issue, though, they would intermarry with humans so that they could continue and not have their race destroyed from the face of the earth. So you have patriarchless tribes in the book of Genesis. And you've got 70 patriarchs, 9 in the Canaanites do not have a patriarch, and they're listed as families. All you have listed is Canaan, Heth, and Sidon. And these are the ones that migrated to live amongst the giants in Canaan after the flood, because the Rephaim are aboriginals of the land, and Canaan and his people migrate there after Babel, so over 100 years after the flood, just over 100 years after the flood. And so they start to intermarry. So you got these Amorites, you have the Jebusites, you have the Hivites, you've got 9 of them who don't have a patriarch. Rephaim were not listed as patriarchs in the table of nations in Genesis 10 and First Chronicles. And so we get an example of that specifically with Arba of the Anakim, or the Anakites as it's translated into English. And the Anakim were a giant in southern Canaan and one of the Rephaim tribes. And we know they're Rephaim because in Deuteronomy 2, they're listed as giants, and the word doesn't go back to Nephilim. Nephilim only shows up 3 times in the Old Testament, referencing antediluvian giants. Rephaim is used 25 times in the Old Testament after the flood. Actually shows up as a tribe name in Genesis 14 in the War of Giants, and then in Genesis 15 when Abraham is being provided the covenant land from the Nile to the Euphrates, where the Rephaim are listed in there as a tribe of people that are occupying the land. So in the book of Joshua, you get listed a fellow by the name of Arba, who is it has a name named patriarchally after him called Kiriath Arba, that we would know as Hebron today. He's called the most famous of the Anakim and the patriarch of the Anakim. So that's one example of a patriarchless giant nation that's not listed in in the Table of Nations. And so you don't have the Zamzummim patriarch, you don't have the Zuzims, you don't have the Emines, you don't have any of the giant nations listed in the Table of Nations, because only human patriarchs from Noah are part of those 70 nations.
Oh, I'm sorry to interrupt. I was just wondering. I know there are a few cultures that that look at like the Greek gods and stuff like that. And does the Titans correlate with those as well?
Yes, they do. So, and I'll just come back around. I was going to also mention that there's the Amorites and those patriarchless Canaanites. They were taller than the Israelites. They're the ones that are that are called taller in Numbers 13:33 in the accurate part of the Scouts report, and then reiterated in Deuteronomy 1 as being taller, but distinguished from the Anakim. They were about 6 to 9 feet tall as hybrids. And so they were called the Shazu by the Egyptians. They're called the Shamau and the Yamau and a few other names in some of the other cultures. So taller, looked similar to obviously the Rephaim patriarchs that produced those tribes and lived with them, but they were not classified as, let's say, pure blood giants or Rephaim. When we talk about the Greeks, they tell the same story. So the best example is a Titan god named Poseidon produces 10 hero Titan kings. So Atlas is one of his sons, and he is both called a hero and a Titan. And in Greek history and mythology, you have demigods, which are defined as the offspring of a god and a human female, or a goddess and a human male. And that Atlas was the demigod giant offspring for Atlantis. And so it tells the same story. You know, Poseidon picked a human female named Cleito to produce those 10 children. So Zeus is the son of Hercules by a human female. And these are post-Diluvian accounts. The Atlantis story, I think, goes back to the antediluvian epoch, but Poseidon inherits the Iapetus sea god title after the parent god disappears. So he accepts as part of that mythos all of the stories that would have been attached to Iapetus. Iapetus would have been most famously known as produced several giants, but the ones that people might be familiar with would be Albion as the giants in England that migrated there, and Magog and Gog.
Wow. And the American, so these stories are not just confined to like the Middle East and in Africa and Europe. These stories of these giant beings are even here in the North and South America through the indigenous people over here, that they would have the same exact description of these giants with having no knowledge of each other.
Right. And the thing is too, I always questioned that. Growing up, receiving, the type of education that I received and telling about all the different cultures and how their lowercase g gods are all the same. And back in the day, they weren't able to interact with one another like that. So how are they depicting the same thing when they don't have access or the ability to communicate with one another like they can now? So it has to have been some type of truth with it.
To me, that validates it. That makes it, it validates one another.
It becomes an impossibility after a while. You have the flood story on all continents except for Antarctica, and who knows what we'll find down there. You have the little people talked about on all continents. You have pyramids on all continents. You have the flood story talked about on all continents, and you have the giants, and they're all sort of interconnected with that antediluvian epoch. And for people who may not be all that familiar with the First Nations here, having giants in there. I mean, you have like the Nahulo giants of the Natchez and the Chickasaw, and a couple other tribes. You've got the Sitka of the Paiutes, you've got the Siska of the Hanoks, and you have the White Snake clan of the Hopi, because they had a serpentine look, because they would take this. Giants tended to take the DNA created when God's took a physical presence on the earth. They created their own DNA. They needed what they call an oiketerion, a dwelling place for their spirit to physically interact. And that's how they would reproduce. But that DNA would be passed on. So most of the Watchers are serpentine in their look. So we know that biblically as the six-winged dragons of heaven. Those are the seraphim angels who had a serpent face. So you see most of the imagery around the world as well, which is no coincidence either, as being serpent gods. And then the kings as their offspring were depicted as serpents because they looked just like them. And even 1,000 years after the flood, for example, with the giants after the flood, you have King Akhenaten. If somebody ever wants to Google that picture or go see a King Tut exhibition that tours, just go have a look at an individual that lived over 1,000 years after the flood and having to intermarry. So having a dilution of those characteristics in the DNA over time, he still looks like a snake. He's got a long protruding chin. He's got high cheekbones, thin lips, wide, round, wraparound eyes, and this elongated skull. And these eyes would light up a room. If people have seen the Stargate series about the Goa'uld, it has these little miniature serpents that take over a body. They would have these deep voices, and when they spoke, their eyes lit up. What's interesting about that is that matches up with not only the Rephaim in the Middle East, but the Anunnaki after the flood and before the flood were known as the Shining Ones, because again, they had those same eyes that would light up. So you have this consistent sort of history being told all around the world. So you have, let's say, we talked about some of the names in North America, but like in subcontinent of India, you've got the Danua, the Daitya, and the Azura, all as giants. You've got the Myosi that were the Chinese giants, and you had dragon creator gods there. Those are the seraphim angels, just as you have Quetzalcoatl as a serpentine creator god with the Quiché Maya and several other gods around Central and North America that just have different vernacular names for the same type of angel. And you have like the Zabalba, which are giants in the Popol Vuh. So you've got names that stretch around the world that tell a common history that isn't taught. And it's because they just don't want to deal with the information that they used to run the world. And in fact, they still do.
Hmm. Now, when they used to breed with the humans, because the law of thermogenetics or thermodynamics says that everything breaks down. So if they were so like the elite, they if they interbreed with their own to keep their bloodline pure. These entities couldn't do that because they had the inability to breed. So they had to breed with humans. So each time that they would breed with humans, their genetic DNA would get watered down, right?
It would. They would stay within a close circle as much as possible, but to ensure you're not creating blood diseases, then you have to continually be at certain periods adding in regenerative bloodlines to stop the disease. So hemophiliac disease would be a classic disease of interbreeding, common amongst the royals, and the one that I like to use as an example because it just drives it home is the Habsburgs had a specific disease deriving from the blood that gave them a deformed jaw. They call it Habsburg jaw. And again, people can Google that.
All you got to do is look at Jay Leno. He's got that's his jaw.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow. what I was going to say is also, as you were talking about, the demigods and the little gods, uh, looking up through the Marvel Studio movies, talking about the return of the demigods. That is complete and total telegraphing us. They're telling exactly what's going to happen. Correct?
Well, they are. And if you look at that word demigod, that was the heroes of old, as they were called in some translations, modern translations of Genesis 6:4. You have the King James Version that says, it was the giants, which were the mighty ones and the men of renown. But in some of the translations that it says Nephilim, because giant in that application derives from a Nephilim. Nephil is the singular form. And the mighty ones are Gibor and Gibborim, as the male plural goes. And then the mighty ones are men of renown, or in other translations actually called like the heroes of old in those translations. And the hero is the same word that was used for the giants, not only in Greek mythology, but in Sumerian mythology. So the heroes of Uruk, like Lugalbanda and Uruk, were called heroes. There's epics that are named after that. So yeah, they were these ancient heroes, and they had super strength and they had super capabilities that other humans didn't have. Some would have, let's say, like Rephaim, for example, were thought to have had a healing capability to them. And that word Rapha, it has three words. The root word Rapha is in the lexicon number 7495, and it means to heal or medicine. So when you see the angel of God that's named Raphael, El would be an angel or a god in Hebrew. That would mean God heals, or the healer of God. And so that word derives 7497, which is the same word, just different meaning, of demons, evil spirits, shades, things like that. And then, I'm sorry, 7496, and then 7497 is the tribe of giants. And all of them are attributed to the giants because you had to take their head, like Goliath's head was taken in other accounts in the Bible, to ensure that they couldn't repair themselves. And in the Egyptian account, losing your head, and the Ugaritic accounts, was the worst thing that could happen, because you wouldn't be able to find your way into Hades or Sheol or the underworld, and to where the gods stayed. But you would either be wandering the earth, or even worse, if you're one of the terrible ones, you'd be sent directly to the abyss, into one of the prisons. So, and that sort of goes along with the myth through time, and how you kill vampires and
I was just going to say,
giants.
isn't that amazing that that's how we kill vampires, but also now we're told how, if a zombie apocalypse ever comes about, how we would be able to kill them, which I do believe is the reanimation of the dead through the disembodied spirits that's going to be released.
Yeah, or they're going to be utilizing cloned bodies. They're going to need an oikatarian, right? They need
a golem, something without a soul.
Yeah, it's exactly right. And if people want to know where I get that oikatarian term from, that comes from Jude 1:6, where it's talking about the creation of the giants and the angels that did it. They left their habitation. That's the Greek word oikatarian, and it's only used one other place in the New Testament, and that's in 2 Corinthians 5:2, for a house in heaven. And it means a dwelling place for the spirit. So just as the angels, to interact physically in the physical world, would create their own oikatarian and take a physical presence. And we know they can, because they're shown as men and all sorts of different variations throughout the Bible. So we know that they can take a physical form and eat and drink and interact. When the giants died, if they lost their bodies, but their spirits didn't go to sleep, and they weren't permitted to go into Hades, and they weren't permitted to go into heaven. So they wander. And as Jesus described them, they're like, they thirst for a body and a place of rest. They're in dry places. So the only way they can interact in the world is to possess a human being. And that's not a symbiotic relationship, because there's already a host in there that they're trying to suppress. So to interact in the end time, to come back, they're going to need an oikatarian, whether or not that is some sort of technological place that can hold a demon spirit, or if it is a clone body or something that's in between, that's like in the transhumanism sort of aspect. What's also interesting out of the Old Testament is you get demons that are called teraphim, and they're the demons that are in talking idols. And I think we're going to see something like that through the mark of the beast in the end time, and other demons operating different forms of things that they're able to create that oikotarian in, just as they did with the talking idol after the flood.
Wow.
So we actually have been talking about this for quite a while. Me, Laurie, and Dr. Joy Pugh, involving you know demon DNA being implemented into the Antichrist. And from my personal research, Laurie's as well, that we firmly suspect that Gilgamesh or Nimrod is going to be cloned and be tied in with a member of the elite to be able to rise as the Antichrist or the son of perdition, as some people will call him.
Well, there's going to be something there that is connected back to fallen angels and or giants, or some sort of cross pollination, as you're talking about in the end time. If you look at that word son of perdition, that is obviously invoking the thoughts of father and son, right? So a genealogy. And that word perdition goes back to the same set of words that produces and is directly connected to etymologically in Hebrew to Apollyon.
Right.
So
That's where CERN
Apollyon,
is built on too.
yeah, and that means destroyer. That's not an angel's name that comes out. Abaddon is destroyer in Hebrew as well, not a name, but the leader of the host of rebellious angels in the antediluvian epoch was Azazel.
Right.
Right.
And so I think Azazel is the destroyer of the antediluvian world. I think he's the scapegoat that's recorded in Leviticus 16, where you have the second goat that is sacrificed on the Day of Atonement, but not with a reason. You have the first goat that's sacrificed for the sins of Israel, but the other one is sent into the wilderness as a sacrifice, and I think it's for the sins of Azazel. And when you look at that word scapegoat, it goes back to the Hebrew word Azazel. So I think there's a connection there, and that I think he's the leader, and he was the one who taught the arts of war, the art of making weapons, the art of tactics to the giants, introduced war to the antediluvian world. And I think he's the one that was hung hung with all of the sins of the antediluvian world as that scapegoat. So I think he's probably connected some way. Either it goes all the way back to Azazel as one of the Satans that are described in the book of Enoch, or there's something else that comes along to sort of reproduce that. So I think there's definitely a connection there.
Talking about the past, so these are the same entities that were chained underneath Euphrates.
Well, if you're referring to the four angels chained at the Euphrates,
yes,
right? Those are definitely fallen angels,
okay,
and they're chained, and they wouldn't be chained unless they're fallen. You wouldn't. We don't get any sort of accounts that demons are chained anywhere. They either tend to roam, or they're either in the
right.
abyss, or they're in the underworld. So so I think the language is consistent with more of the angelic sort of fallen angelic sort of understanding. But the abyss is in the underworld. It's in Hades. It's in Sheol. It's just in probably a different dimension, which again leads you back to what they're doing for research at CERN. But to stay on track, Tartarus was also located in the underworld as well as a prison. So it's the same sort of Greek accounting as the abyss in the Bible. And it's out of that abyss is where they say giants escape
Right.
from, and
Right.
how they show up after the flood in one of their accountings. So you have that sort of consistent sort of understanding that there are things that are in the earth. They may not necessarily be in this dimension.
Wow.
Right? It could be in another dimension, and that's probably why at CERN they're trying to mash up and are meshing up AI and quantum computing so that they can search in multiple shots at the same time in multiple dimensions. And they're looking for, I think, one of two things. They're looking for, one, the abyss, so they can get those gods back out for the end
Right.
time, which happens in the end time. They're also looking for what they call the Atma particle, ATMA, or the ATMAN, that comes out of the Upanishads and the Vedas. And that's where the philosophical dynamite derived from for quantum mechanics. And the pioneers of quantum mechanics said that if you want to understand what we're trying to develop with quantum mechanics that will lead into multiple dimensions and quantum computing, to be able to do that, you have to understand the Vedas, because it's all written in there. And also written in there is this Atma particle, and it's an invisible particle. When you can detect an invisible particle through science, that's what they would call, a visible particle. But this Atma particle is not detectable. What it does is it merges, and this comes out of the Upanishads, believe me, and it merges with a solid particle, and then through quantum entanglement shoots its information across the universe in all dimensions instantaneously. And it's this Atman particle that holds the knowledge and the information of the universe that they want to tap into, because they're going to be able to want to offer two things: unlimited knowledge with the mark of the beast, and they're going to also want to give immortality in the physical world. So they're going to need that for the coming beast implant system that has all of these high-tech technologies still developing in separate lanes.
And Ray Kurzweil, he a lot of people has noted him as the father of transhumanism, and he firmly believes that combining man versus machine will lead to immortality. And nobody really talks about him anymore, but I
Was he
still
the one
think
that
he's
did
at
the
the
TED?
forefront.
Was he the one that did the TED talk that warned everybody about AI and transhumanism?
No, I would believe that was Stephen Hawking.
Well, even Elon Musk said
Yep.
Yeah.
said that if you're going to develop AI, and he was part of that you're summoning the demon.
Absolutely.
And one of the demons that's really interesting, that is a common name that seemingly they're in contact with to develop this high-tech stuff, is the name Metatron. And
Yes.
and that's where Meta Universe comes from. That's where Facebook Meta comes from. Metatron is recorded in the third book of Enoch, and he is actually Enoch, son of Cain, who evolves into a god and is taken into heaven like the Son of Man. He's very much Son of Man like in that accounting, through his knowledge, and his name was changed to Metatron from Enoch when he was promoted to angelic status. And it's interesting that would be the same name that is being used with the people in the high tech end on development.
And Hollywood, we've got the movies once again with the telegraphing, telling of these gods ripping through the dimensions and returning to this dimension.
Yeah.
Metatron was one of their I don't want to say one of their gods.
Yep. Absolutely. It's none of this is coincidental, as with the superheroes. No. I mean, all those superheroes are based on these ancient Nephilim, just different kinds of Nephilim, and the ones that are a little bit different have DNA manipulation or have some sort of advanced technology built into them, as in transhumanism, but it's still talking about the same types of creatures that walked before the flood. So they're going,
which is what they're trying to do right now with the thing that we're not supposed to talk about.
The mRNA thing we're not supposed to talk about? Yes.
Yes. pestilence is something that we have to be careful with.
Exactly. And, merging and manipulating our DNA. I mean, those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. And if
Yeah.
we don't look at what happened prior to the flood, because as in the days of Noah, we're looking at things that had happened that had caused the Most High to destroy this world, we're doomed to repeat it. And it's exactly what they're trying to do. They're trying
Yeah,
to
they are.
to
And they're using the same words and names and
right,
titles and things out of
right,
prehistory, like chimeras. They're trying to
yep,
cross-pollinate different animals. And
right,
and for people to say, well, how do we know that that might have went on biblically, right? Well, you've got the flood story that has these supernatural giants, but within that narrative, you have God saying the whole earth has become corrupted with violence, and corrupted as a whole. That word corrupt is the Hebrew word shakath, and it means decay, ruin. Words like that suggest a change, that things were spoiled. Spoiled is another one of its definitions. Typically, Hebrew words and Greek words have several different meanings. Some of them are nuanced, some of them can have very divergent meanings, but this is very consistent, that is saying something was changed in a way that took away from its former nature, and not as good in terms, at least in God's eyes. So the whole world was corrupt, and that means all the plant genome and all of the DNA. So not just the DNA that's being passed on to humankind, but some sort of DNA manipulation, as in the chimera effect, or the creation of the centaur somehow in a cloud off the earth, and or all of these other creatures that we see in polytheism. And so that's why they had to have a complete restart, is to get rid of all of that corruption. And it's that corruption of that organizational structure of the giants as the kings and their mystical, universal religion that was imposed on people, and the development of the knowledge in that knowledge cult that brought the world into the first apocalypse. And there's another expression in the Bible that's in the book of Ecclesiastics is there's nothing new under the sun. What has been will be again. The end time is going to be very much akin to the flood. So if you want to understand end time prophecy, you need to understand prehistory.
Now I want to ask you a question, because you had mentioned about how their ancestors, or their offspring, how they can take human form, how they eat, they drink, and they basically look normal. The people that are running the show right now, the elites, the ones that we see, being the 13 Illuminati families, and above that, the popes and everything, they all come from that same bloodline, correct?
Yeah, it's the bloodlines actually in the whole, in my research, shows supersede and are at the top of the whole secret society organizational structure. So they call it a thelemic tree. And it's like the world tree in the mystical religion, where you've got this tree that touches the earth and the heaven, but its roots go down to Hades, which is the polytheist heaven. And that's where the power is driven from. And in that organizational structure, you have the thelemic tree trunk, and you have these trunk organizations. So Freemasonry would be the first degree of adepthood at 33rd degree Scottish Rite, and on the old system, 3rd degree York Rite. Above that is the Illuminati, and above that is the Rosicrucians. And now you have to be invited to be part of Freemasonry, and typically that means you're going to have at least diluted bloodlines, or they're just going to keep you below adept level.
Right.
And
Well,
you're not told the whole knowledge before adepthood. And then at the Rosicrucian level, the top half are purebloods. And these are the royals that track their genealogies back into prehistory, back to Rephaim, Nephilim, and to specific godfathers or angels. And that above the Rosicrucians, you have the Committee of 300, And then you have the Council of 33 and the 13 families, which sits at the top of the Western organizational structure. And so they hold that whole ideology, and they hold the money that starts to control everything below them. And so you have organizations that will branch into these trunk organizations. So like the Freemasons, for example, would be over non-adept level initiatory societies, and they would branch in. And then you have the Illuminati, who, a lot of them actually oversee, as fifth degree, they would oversee some of the Freemason lodges as kind of like a regional manager, but they would be in their agenda working on destruction of Christianity and world government. And they would have organizations that are branching into them, like the Bohemian Club, that most people are aware of. The Rosicrucians, who look after the history and are big into alchemy and things like that, and control the religion, the Gnostic religion, that they brought with them, which is sort of a combination of all the pantheons around the world, as they take that back as the original mystical religion. They would have groups, answering into them, like the Bilderbergers, for example. And the Committee of 300 sometimes interact, but they would have the Club of Rome that would be intersecting with them as one example. But imagine these branches that would have a hierarchy that goes down to the lower ends of those branch offshoots that would all be coming back to this main trunk order. So the Jesuits would answer into probably the Committee of 300 as well, through the black nobility part of those bloodlines.
Right. And the Most High thought it was important for us to understand or to pay attention to the bloodlines. I mean, he took the time in the writing of the word to put in, this person begat this person to begat this person. And to me, that was his way of saying, pay attention to the bloodlines. They're important.
Yeah, genealogies are important. And we're also told not to get hung up on genealogies, but what he wanted to do was to sort of paint the patriarchal bloodline, and he wanted to paint the beginning nation states, right? That would answer to the gods that run this earth, and to their demigods that physically, ran it through the kingships and the army and through the priest class. But bloodlines are very, very, very important. And we're told about this ancient bloodline in many, many different forms throughout the Bible. I think the most clearest one that shows up would be Psalm 21:9 through 11. And in that psalm, this is an end time reference with the time of the wrath and the fiery destruction of the end time. And then in verse 21, 21 verse 10, it talks about the fruit will be destroyed from the earth of these people that are doing this kind of destruction, and their seed from amongst the children of men. And these terrible ones, as they're called, as I mentioned throughout the Bible, it says about them as they intended evil and imagined mischievous things, and but they weren't able to in the end time to carry it out. So it's telling us about the branch of the terrible ones, as Isaiah 25 calls them, and that we need to be aware of this bloodline. And they hide it in plain sight. For example, Prince Charles, he boldly talks about his, genealogies that would go back to Vlad the Impaler.
The Impaler, yeah.
Yeah,
he's kind of proud of that, isn't he?
He is. I mean, you can Google that too. Let's get a couple of the articles on it. And that's because they keep those genealogies. And that genealogy goes back through the Hanovers of Germany, because they were the original kings, starting with King George in the time of just before the American Revolution. And that bloodline goes back to Vlad the Impaler, who is the model for Dracula, the guy you have to take his head off, and is a vampire-like character, just like Nephilim drank blood to extend their life. He was the model to Arthur Dordanan Scythian, who takes his genealogies back to Hercules and to the Agrithi tribe descended from Hercules. And he is described as an individual that was educated at the Center of Solomon in Vienna, School of Solomon, which was a mystical teaching school. And he's had this pale skin. He had this red hair. He had hazel eyes. And he had these vampire teeth like a cobra or a snake that would come out of the Egyptian sort of imagery of that, drank blood to stay alive and to keep his immortality, the enemies of humans. And he looks and sounds as a description just like the descriptions of Nephilim and Rephaim after the flood, because again, they had pale skin. And they had the same colors of hair, same hair, eye colors, and also drank blood both sides of the flood.
Yeah, I just pulled up. It says, "Why does Charles consider Transylvania his second home?" Says, "Did you know that Prince Charles, well, it's King Charles now, and Vlad the Impaler are actually related?" And it appears that King Charles has a castle retreat in Transylvania. Interesting.
Yeah, well, he would be considered, one of those reigning kings as he is now that would be considered as one that would be an Antichrist type of individual if the Antichrist comes from the genealogical bloodlines. In the Western groups, they keep 3 Antichrist figures ready to go all of the time. And they're all trained and initiated from childhood. So they're an adept before they become 18. They tend to be super mensa. They have, all sort, whatever the occult powers that they're trained in to do. And they're always looking for that opportunity to assert that one of their individuals on the throne. It's also interesting that there are 3 bloodlines in the West with the Anjou mainly, who hold rival claims to the King of Jerusalem title. And in their belief system is their dragon Messiah will be crowned with the King of Jerusalem title at the abomination when Antichrist takes power. So they've got individuals, and there's 3 families, and these 3 families are outside of the Windsor family in England. And that Jerusalem title was first crowned in the modern time in 1118 with the Anjou family as one of the members, or let me just correct myself on that. It starts with the Knights Templar and with the crowning of Baldwin II, which is part of the Anjou bloodline in 1118 in a small priory on the Rock of Zion in Jerusalem. And they have, because they keep their genealogies, not only do they take their genealogies, and there's 3 of them that go back to the Merovingians, the last survivor, Dagobert. You have de Payan, and you de Bouillon, and Anjou. And the Merovingians claim that they have scioned or grafted bloodlines that not only go back to the giants, but also go back to the people of the covenant, to the people of Israel. So they have bloodlines that would go back to King David. And they have bloodlines that also goes back to King Saul. And Saul was a Benjamite. So they also have bloodlines through the Benjamites, through the Sicambian Franks, as that tradition goes, that goes back to King Saul and the Benjamites. And the Benjamites were awarded Jerusalem by Joshua in the time of the conquest of the Promised Land. So they look at Jerusalem as their inheritance, and that's why they crown themselves as the King of Jerusalem. So there's 3 rivals to that today. The one that has the most sort of consistent legitimacy to it of the Anjou family, of the Anjou bloodline, is the current King of Spain, who is a Bourbon, who received that through the Habsburg dynasty, that was grafted in through the houses of Lorraine. And those three founders of the Knights Templar were from the Lorraine region, Anjou, de Payan, and de Bouillon. And so they've been tracking that title for that time to claim the King of Jerusalem title. I don't know whether they can fulfill their claim. All I know is what they say they want to do. And they would like to have their families, and I think all of the bloodline families would like to have their family be the nobility family that would rule the world. So we're also going to see multiple antichrists, as Jesus talks about in Matthew 24, Mark 13, and we're told in the epistles of John. So expect antichrist rivals from around the world that will be mixed in with these 10 kings of the end time.
I don't know if you see this up on the screen, but this is talking about the Merovingian dynasty. And if you scroll down here, it talks about the Nephilim. It says the term Merovingian is said to be derived from the Merovingi, who was king of the Franks from 447 to 458 AD. Despite recent claims that the Merovingian Franks are sired by Jesus Christ and Mary Magdalene and are therefore divine, the legend of King Merovingi conceals the true origins of the Merovingian race and Ramon iniquity. According to the legend and explained in the bloodline of the Holy Grail, Merovingi had two fathers, King Clodion and a strange beast of the sea
named the Quinotaur, which had a bull's head, which is the same thing as a minotaur. And so if you get into the minotaur,
again, all these things that we were taught in
Nephilim.
school that were supposedly myths. Don't worry about it. It's just mythology. It didn't really happen. It's just kind of just stories made up. They're not.
Yeah. And they encode their genealogies in their coat of arms.
Yes. Yep.
And it was in what they was originally designed. If you were to meet people either for a meeting or on the battlefield or just come across them, you would carry your coat of arms or a banner, as it originally started with, and it would, through the imagery, tell that other royale who you were. And that word royale comes from the word king and al, which is the transliterated el for a god. So these are the kings of God. That's what they believe. They believe they have the divine right to rule that was granted to them after the flood through the Baalim from Mount Hermon. And so that's why you have the Stuart kings who really asserted that divine right to rule. But they all believe that, and they believe that they continue to rule through the right of inheritance, which goes back to the Rephaim and the Nephilim. These are the
and that's not even that. We're not even talking that bleeds over from the royal families of the East, and it comes into the presidentials and leaders of the world over in the West here. Yes. They're all in this one bloodline. They're all related. The left, the right paradigm is not even relevant because it doesn't matter who gets to be in charge. They're all driving the bus to the same destination.
Yeah, and most of them, and I haven't done any checks since the Bush's presidency, but there was some research that was done on it, and all of the presidents had genealogies that go back to King John of the Plantagenet of the Magna Carta. The Plantagenet is an offshoot, a junior offshoot of the Anjou.
Yeah, they think they're slick. They think they can hide it, but in all reality, I have a question. I don't know if you're aware, or I'm sure you're aware of Dr. Joy Pugh and her research on Prince William.
Yep.
We've had Joy on here many times. I've done extensive research for quite a number. I think it was 5 years I did, and came to the same conclusion that William was one of the highest possibilities, modern possibilities of the Antichrist. What is your opinion on that?
Yeah, that's why I had mentioned earlier, I don't rule out the Windsors as being in Prince Charles, and of course William would replace. I mean, we don't know how fast these events would come together.
It would be that bloodline. I would say if it's not William, then it's one of his children.
Yeah, one would think what we do know is we'll get it. We'll know who this individual is when he negotiates the 7-year covenant.
Right.
But typically people understand that prophecy is that he might be sort of relatively unknown. So it may not be somebody that is quite as visual
Well,
as
he
what
could
we
be
would
doing
think.
it on behalf of, say the Antichrist, whoever it is, William or otherwise, could hide his identity by sending somebody unknown to negotiate that deal for him.
Yep, that's a possibility too, right? They have all the ability to do that. So what's interesting as well is we should be looking at other cultures who will present their own Messiah as well. So I mean, you have the Mahdi of the Shia, and the Sunni have one of a similar name, just a different sort of outcome. You've got Lord Maitreya, that's thought of as an Antichrist figure, or new Buddha in the Hindus. You have royal families that are out there from all around the world. And so you see this rising group of nations in the East. And, you look at President Xi of China. Well, Xi, that's the last name. There's two names that come out of the most common names that come out of the Chinese dynasty are Xi of the Western bloodline and Li. They all go back to the original Xia tribe that were created by the dragon creator gods. They were the complete lineage of the Chinese dynasties until the communists took them over. And now you have somebody who's of that bloodline who's trying to establish his end time empire. And then you've got somebody over there in Russia trying to do a similar thing.
So you believe that there is a struggle for power right now through these bloodlines?
Oh, there's always a rival because
Yeah.
there can only be one. It's like that
Right.
Highlander movies, right?
Right. There's another movie. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
amazing.
yeah. And they use
When you were
the
talking
fairy imagery there.
when you were talking about some of these kids or the offspring of them, my mind went to the I want to say I just went out of my mind. The X-Men. The X-Men, how the kids at the school had these powers and had these that they had to keep hidden. Not too long ago, Gary, I think it was like a month ago, we got a story here out of Chicago that they've opened up a real magic school here looking for kids with special gifts.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, there's no doubt that they'll be looking for people of the gene of Isis, as I like to call it. It's also known as the fairy gene. It's the gene that produces the Rh negative bloodline. A lot of people say, well, that can't be a bloodline because that was added because it's missing the D antigen.
but
It's
the
the
scientists
gene that
don't even
guides
know
that.
where that came from. It just
Sure,
that appeared in the Basque region. And what's interesting about the Basque region is not only did the Rh negative, that's where it first appeared. Scientists don't know how it got there or what happened. It's not a mutation because blood cells cannot mutate. So it's not a mutation. But what's interesting is the fact that the Basque region has a language that's tied to no other language on earth. So it's almost like those people were just kind of put there.
Yeah, and the Rh negative is, depending on the survey that you do, has a concentration factor of about 50 to 80%. And it's only 15% in the whole world. So the Basques in their mythological history say that they were the initial survivors of the flood. And after the flood, they established the Egyptian post-Diluvian civilization, the Sumer civilization, the Scythian civilization, and then settled into northern Spain and southwest France. And so they had a falling out with the bloodlines that migrated out of the Middle East, and they considered themselves superior to the royals coming out of the Middle East that we would know as the European monarchies today. And that's why you had a crushing of that bloodline because they wanted to eliminate a more noble bloodline. It's also thought that the Europeans who created communism used that to destroy the pureblood Scythian bloodline of the czars of Russia, because again, they didn't want that kind of rival. And when you talk about the magic shows and the magic teaching, they're looking for people of that gene, because typically with that gene or that blood type, they believe, and research tends to show, that they'll have a higher intelligence level. They say 135 plus. They have better intuitive abilities, more psychic abilities, larger heads and eyes, a lower body temperature, lower blood pressure, higher percentage of blonde and red hair, higher percentages of green and hazel eyes.
Lower body temperature. I mean, if you look at it, it all looks a little bit reptilian, doesn't it?
It does. It definitely has a reptilian sort of slant to it. And they tend to have more interactivity with aliens and or other sort of occult sort of things that would happen. And they also believe
stories.
And they also believe they can't be cloned for some reason. So
yeah, that's another thing is the negative, the arch negative. Now but I thought, here's what's interesting is Obama, AB negative, Anunnaki, or the Pharaoh, Akhenaten, AB negative, William, AB negative. So they have their claim, these in high government offices. And if, we do have this reptilian blood or bloodline or this reptilian traits, this would definitely collaborate that.
Sure. And we'll add Eisenhower as O negative. We'll add Clinton as O negative.
Yeah.
Bush as A negative.
See?
Kennedy is AB negative. Some say he was O. O negative is the most royal of the bloodlines because it's universal, right? So,
universal donor.
Yes.
Yeah, the bloodlines, like I said, and I've always said this when I did started my research, is that when you look at the Bible, the chapters that talk about the bloodline, the who begat whom, looks so out of place. It's almost like it was put there specifically for us to pay attention to. We need to know the bloodlines in order to know what's coming.
Exactly. There isn't a detail, I believe, in the Bible that's not important. We may not recognize it, but it's there for
it just always looked out of place to me. I mean, you're sitting there, you're starting to read, and all of a sudden you got this whole entire thing of who begat who. It's just I for years I used to skip over it. For years I did. I was like, this is not important. And then I came to that conclusion that there's nothing in the Bible that's not important, Laurie.
And as more of this research gets out there, I know I get a lot of people contacting me and they say, for the first time, the Old Testament makes sense, and I find it interesting now.
Exactly. Yes, I've had the same experience. I always thought that the Old Testament really didn't concern me, years and years and years ago. But then, I've discovered that there is so much truth, and there's so much, again, if you don't understand the past, you're doomed to repeat it.
Exactly.
So there's a saying in order to understand the future, you need to go back in time.
Yeah, I think we ought to get the wisdom from the past, but obviously we don't seem to alter the course, at least as a general sense, because we keep moving in the same sort of.
That's the truth. So let's talk a little bit about what you think is going to happen in the future. I mean, what are some of the things that have to happen in order for prophecy to be fulfilled? Let me ask you first, do you believe we're in tribulation? Do you believe we're on the cusp of tribulation? Where do you think we are in the timeline, and where are these demigods, and how close are they to returning?
Yeah, I think we're probably in the fig tree generation, as Jesus taught us in Matthew 24, Mark 13, and Luke 17 and 21. And I think that fig tree tells us that that's likely uh, a reference, as the southern kingdom Judah is known as the fig tree in prophetic allegory. And just before Jesus went into the temple, and just before he gave his oration of the signs of the end time, he kills a fig tree because the fruit was barren there. And so, he begins, it doesn't begin, but it's the fig tree is that overarching sign for the end time. And so when you see the fig tree blooming, that's Judah in the
Right.
covenant land again. And
Right.
so what we do know is we get different timelines for what a generation is. So in the book of Exodus, it talks about 40 years. In the book of Psalms, it's 70 years. In Genesis 6:3, in the creation of the giants, life is limited to 120 years. So
Right.
it could be any point within that, and it doesn't have to be a full generation. Israel declared independence in 1947, fought the battle in 1948. I think that's not the thing that starts the time clock, because they didn't control Jerusalem. To me, if there's one thing over and above the southern kingdom being back in the land of the covenant, is controlling Jerusalem. And that happened in 1967. So if that's the case, it's probably 70 or 120 years. I don't know which one it is after that. So I think we're still in the birth pangs, or the beginning of sorrows, which is another one of the arching signs that we need to pay attention to, because those birth pangs of wars and rumors of war, pestilence, pandemic, famine, and earthquakes get stronger as you go throughout the fig tree generation. And so by the time you get to the seals, which is right at just before or just after the start of the last 7 years, I think just before, you're going to get wars that are going to take 25% of the population out, and 25% of the whole ecosystem, and waters are destroyed. So, and then 33% with the trumpets, and then 100% with the wrath bowls, except Jesus steps in to prevent that from happening. So you see that progression in the
Right.
strength of those catastrophes, and they're the same catastrophes in the seals, the trumpets, and the wrath bowls as described in the sorrows. So I think we're seeing the birth pangs getting stronger. And so we're seeing stronger pestilence. We're seeing famine that will come out of that. And we're just with small shortages, we're starting to see some increase in famine, and we're going to see that get stronger. But what I think is the real sign of what's starting to shape up is what's going on in China and in Russia. So you have a formation of a group of countries, of Russia trying to form an empire, China who wants to expand and form an empire. India is supporting them because they get all of their energy from Russia. You've got Iran working with them, that wants to get their hands on Iraq, and you've got Turkey that's starting to work with the Russians, and I think will leave NATO. And then you've got Germany that is part of NATO, but they're totally relied on the Russians for energy, which I think is going to maybe drive them more to the east. I think what we're seeing is a rise of the 10 empires of the end time, the 10 kings with groups
10
of
kings.
nations.
Mm-hmm.
And Putin is the first to sort of make the play, to say, hey, I'm not against the Nephilim world order. I am wanting a larger role in it, and I want my old bloodline empire. Now, he's not technically a royal as we would understand it, but he is born in Kiev. And Kiev is the home of the original czars and the bloodlines, and Scythian bloodlines. And they were the ones who started the Moscow outpost. And started and put the Putyanin bloodline in Moscow that was succeeded by through intermarriage with the Romanovs that were brought down in World War I as too pure and too much of a rival of a bloodline. The Putin name comes out of nowhere with his grandfather in about 1950. It's nowhere to be seen in the
Yeah, there's
nomenclature of names
more
before
to
that.
this whole Ukrainian war that Putin has going on here. Personally, and this is just my thought on it, I think Putin is after some relics. I think there's something that he feels that he needs to gain his seat at the big boy table.
I think it's more than that. I think it goes back to where he sees he wants to be in this new world order, and just sort of continuing with, and I'll get to the point a little bit quicker on it, is that his father moves from Kiev to St. Petersburg, and that's how he gets to Russia. But he believes, just as the tradition was in Kiev with children born outside the legitimate marriage of the royals, of the Putyanin, they would see part of the name. He has filled his imagery with Vladimir the Great as part of the Tsarist bloodline. He has the double eagle. He has brought in the Constantinople church. He wants Kiev as the center and the holy city of his ancestors, the origination of the Scythian Tsars of the Tuatha De Danann. And so he's going to protect Kiev, but he wants to rebuild that whole empire. What's interesting about that group of nations that I was talking about is that you have in those 10 kings of the end time, they're shown in Daniel 2 in the metallic empire prophecy of 5 toes on each foot, just as the iron empire of Rome had 2 legs and had a center in Rome and a center in Constantinople. And so look for something like that for the East, but there'll be a 5-king split. And I think we're starting to see that start to form in the East, and they're prepared to create their own cryptocurrency. They have their own banking system. They have their own credit cards, and they don't need to deal with the West.
Yeah, cryptocurrency, that's a whole nother issue that well, we get into that.
I mentioned Wednesday that everybody who is trying to invest in other forms of currencies such as gold, silver, precious stones, and stuff like that, it's going to still be worthless because everything is going to be moved over to the digital dollar.
Yeah, and they've let the cryptocurrency go to develop it. And we're seeing central banks starting to move in to take control of that and control it more. They need a cryptocurrency to mesh with this high-tech implant system, this beast system that's going to be coming. And so they need that for that whole world system that they want to implement. So that's got to be part of that equation.
Yeah, and anybody that thinks that cryptocurrency is void of any of the bankers, the world powers control, think again, because it's completely opposite. I've talked many times about the secret meetings that have taken place on Necker Island regarding cryptocurrency, and it's totally reminiscent of Jekyll Island and the formation of the formation of our banking system.
Yeah. And so you're going to see all of these technologies kind of merge. And in the end time scenario, we haven't seen Babylon yet rise. And you need Babylon is going to be the one who sponsors Antichrist to negotiate that 7-year covenant. And Babylon's going to be the one that rides the beast of empires again, as the woman in Revelation 17. And Babylon is the one that leads the whole world astray through her sorceries.
Yes.
And that's the Greek word pharmakeia. And that whole system is part of the whole beast system, including the healthcare. And the Davos group, which answers to the Committee of 300 and had a real interesting performance here at the G20.
Oh, didn't they though?
Yeah. They announced, and I think it was 2017-18, they believe their implant system will come about through the healthcare as the delivery system, because people will demand improved health.
Right.
And what do they mean by that? They want protection from pestilence.
Yeah, and I think that's why we saw in 2020, we saw the release of that thing we're not supposed to talk about, is to get people afraid, to get them to live in fear, to get them dim, because they would much rather take you over if you willingly demand it than to forcefully take you over. So if they can get you into fear and then get you into that mind control of protecting yourself, yeah, people will demand to be protected more.
Yeah. And it provides all that other stuff for immortality as well, right? And the connection of knowledge that we talked about earlier. Right. So what's interesting about that word sorcery as well is that's out of the Baconian language for the King James Version Bible. And it's interesting that the people who created the Royal Society in 1662 were Rosicrucians and Freemasons. And as Robert Lomas talks about in his book, The Invisible College, that's another name for the Royal Society, is that the original founders described themselves as the last of the sorcerers and the first of the scientists.
Right. It says pharmakia here. It's a female, it's a noun, and it says witchcraft, sorcery. The use of administering drugs, poisoning, sorcery, magical arts often found in connection with idolatry and fostered by it. Deceptions and seductions of idolatry. And this is through the lexicon, the Strong's Concordance.
Yep. Yeah. And magical spells. So it can be concoctions like in alchemy, but it has the ability to do magic spells as well. And you've got that word, there's a few different versions. Sorcerer goes back to a very similar word to sorcerers, but there's like 3 or 4 words, but they all mean the same thing. They're all interconnected as you take that back to Greece. So when you look at how Babylon's going to control the people, it's through that beast system that is going to provide all of these things that will be waiting for Antichrist just to take it to the next level with the actual mark of the beast.
Wow. And I believe that we're close to that. We're seeing that unfold. They get closer and closer to it every day. We have a question from somebody in the chat room. Kim wants to know, what do you think about Yehuda in Israel, whom they're claiming is the Messiah?
Well, as I say, we're going to see lots of messiahs come forward and lots of claims for Messiah. They're going to start. I think we're going to see so many, we're going to say, the heck with that. Including, but there's going to be one that deceives everybody, but not in a way that I think most people think they'll be deceived by it. So if you think about Antichrist, he's going to need a counterfeit Armageddon.
Right.
And so there's going to be somebody who comes about who's going to lead an alliance of nations that's going to be Armageddon-like. That's the Revelation 9 war, which is the same as the Joel 1 and 2 war, as opposed to Joel 3, which is the Armageddon war. And it's the Gog and Magog war of Ezekiel 38 and 39. And it's interesting that Gog only shows up in the Bible in reference to Ezekiel 38, 39, and Revelation 20, which is another war. And we know this is an end time war because it happens in the latter days, Ezekiel 38, 39, and we know that it happens after Second Exodus, as Ezekiel 39 talks about. So Gog isn't in the Bible. He's not in the table of nations. Magog is, but not Gog. And this is Gog of Magog, chief prince of Meshech. And Meshech is the root word that Moscow derives from. And Gog,
we've talked about this on our show with Earnie and I. We've talked about Putin and the formation of the Gog and Magog, alliance.
Yes. And if you look at that alliance, you've got Persia which are ancient Aryans, Indo-Aryans, which are giants. And Aryans also included India, because they settled the river valley, the Indus River Valley, and started the subcontinent of India civilization. You've got Tagarma, which is the current country of Turkey, that's starting to be kind of a mediator, and I think will leave. Gomer is Germany, and they're going to be forced to go with that Eastern alliance. So you see that shakeup sort of starting to come about. And Gog, as I said, was a giant son of Iapetus, a parent god before the flood. And it's defined as in Greek and in the Old Testament as an end time Antichrist figure. So he's going to look like Antichrist. Antichrist will take credit for winning that war and then take his armies in, as Daniel 11 and Luke, I think it's 21 or 17, one or the other, takes his armies to surround Jerusalem, and that's when he sets up the abomination. So he's going to fake the Armageddon, and it takes a war like that Revelation 9 war or the Ezekiel 38, 39 war to pull off that counterfeit.
We're seeing so much talking about nuclear? Do you think that it might be a nuclear exchange?
Oh, I think we'll see nuclear exchanges even before that.
Wow. Okay.
Just limited, but by the time of that war, it's going to be a significant nuclear war. And before that, because that happens between the seals and the judgments, and this war happens just before the midpoint, say about a year out from the midpoint of the last 7 years, the 25% destruction happens at about the beginning of the last 7 years. And that's going to be what really solidifies that end time empire and permit the false prophets to come on the stage, because they're going to predict those catastrophes because they're all contrived, and they're going to be able to raise Babylon up to be a universal religion that will permit the 10 kings to come to power. And it will permit, because it's a universal religion and not subservient to Islam, but Islam will be subservient to the ancient Enochian religion of the antediluvian epoch. Enochian as in son of Cain. They will be able to do the sacrifices on a wing, an overspreading, or an extremity of the temple, which will be, and that's the only way that could happen, is if you have a universal religion that that pulls Islam in.
Well, Chrislam is now officially, it's been declared officially the religion of the New World Order. The opening of the Abrahamic house in Dubai, in Dubai, it's just taking place, and we just saw the release of the new 10 Commandments on Mount Sinai just 2 weeks ago. So it's that one world religion is moving forward with Judaism, Christianity, and Islam all forming together into this one perfect world religion.
Yes, and the Pope is making overtures to the other polytheist religions. So they're going to need to pull it all in, and it'll be like this massive umbrella religion with all these different sort of branches underneath. But it will be polytheist, and it will be mystical religion, just as Mystery Babylon is an initiatory religion, as you take those words back into Greek.
Yeah, the things that are coming, and the Bible tells us, the hearts of men will grow weak. People that they'll be begging for death and won't be able to find it. I don't think people are prepared, Gary, for what is coming.
No, they're not.
I mean, we see such a total lack and falling away from the belief, from the Bible, from their foundation in the Most High, and it's getting worse and more corrupt every day.
And it seems to be the case when it comes to the Catholic Church. A lot of people are failing to see the sinful acts they have and still are committing right now.
But as I say, there's going to have to be something really significant to come along.
Right.
Because the pace that they're putting the world order together with, or the universal religion together with, is painfully slow. And I'm talking from their point of view.
Something that is world. It's got to be not something that is like region changing. Like it won't be something that it happens in the United States that changes the United States, or not just something that's going to happen over in the UK and change the UK. But it needs to be a world changing event, like I don't know. Let's just put this out there: an alien invasion.
That would certainly be part of it, but I think it
That'd
would
be
take
certainly.
more than that too. I think catastrophes on a worldwide scale
Well,
in
a what?
combination.
Yeah, some sort of nuclear war, and the aliens come down. Ronald Reagan, when he was talking to the United Nations, he said that the thing that would he felt that would bring the world together would be an alien invasion, and he said whether we do it ourselves or whether it really happens.
Yeah.
So he even knew the possibility of it being fake.
Exactly. So, and they're preparing us well for that, right? For
Yeah.
everything. But we know they're very frustrated. And again, with the meeting at the G20, you can see that frustration that things didn't quite happen the way they wanted out of the last catastrophe.
Right.
Um,
Well, you know
so
what?
they're doubling. So now they double down, and now they're going to get
Right.
super aggressive after they've learned what
Correct.
worked and what didn't work.
Exactly. And a lot of people say, I don't understand why you do what you do, Laurie. It's not like you have the ability to stop the New World Order. No, I don't have the ability. But the more people I wake up, the bigger blood, black eye that we can give them.
Yeah, and it's about having people not be deceived,
Right.
so that they get to control whether or not they would like to be saved or not.
Exactly. Debbie, you are absolutely right. They can harm us, but they cannot take our soul. Absolutely. Gary, we got about 15 minutes before we come up on the 2-hour mark. You had mentioned before we went live that you are in the process of writing a new book. Would you like to talk to us or let us know a little bit about that in the next 10 minutes before we wrap up?
Sure, love to. So I wrote a sequel to the Genesis 6 conspiracy, and I said I would never do that because I didn't want to be redundant. But what I have learned from people contacting me and taking questions on shows is that there's this vast thirst from within the Bible that they want to go really deep. They want to know everything in the Bible that has to do with prehistory, has to do with the angelic realm, has to do with giants, and they want to know how that relates to the end time. And so this book is called The Genesis 6 Conspiracy Part 2, and the subtitle will be something like how understanding prehistory helps define end time prophecy. So what I do is I talk about how all the things that happen in the Bible as it refers to the giants in prehistory, how that is coming up in the end time in terms of the prophetic allegory that will help you have a better understanding of it. So it's going to be a slightly smaller book, but not a whole lot smaller because there's just a ton of information in there. So I cover the patriarchless nations, for example, that we were talking about. I cover the organizational structure of the angelic realm and the fallen angelic realm. I cover giants in detail of how many giant nations are actually listed. I'll take those back to the patriarchs, and then I'll connect all of this into end time prophecy and give sort of an outline of the chronology of end time prophecy and how to go about laying out one that makes sense, that gets rid of the contradictions.
Wow, I can't wait for that. Do you have a website for us?
I do. It's the Genesis 6 Conspiracy with the number 6conspiracy.com. And on that website, I have a generous excerpt of all 98 chapters for my book, so people can get a good feel for the book. Yes, there's a generous excerpt, but no, it's not the whole book. It's just the tip of the iceberg, believe me. It's because it's loaded with information all the way through. If you want to get a hold of me, like if you wanted to get a document, let's say on what I was talking about with Xi or what I was talking about with Putin or other information, just name a topic. If I've got that document, I'll get it off to you. Just hit the contact the author icon, and that'll connect you through on email to me. And if you wanted to buy a book, you can get a signed copy off of my website. And if you wanted to link over and get a digital version, you can link over to Kindle and get the digital version, or over to Amazon.com, Amazon.ca, and or BarnesandNoble.com. For signed copies, I have a page for Canada, I have a page for the US, and the page for overseas. So wherever you live, I can get a book to you if you want a signed copy. And the second book will be marketed from the same website.
Awesome. And I'm going to put the link in the description as always for you guys to take over there, take a look. Gary, I really want to thank you for coming on here and talking to us, because this is a topic that a lot of people who, even though they're awake, they're just not, I don't think they understand that these demigods, these giants, they're returning.
They are. I think what we have is a scenario where we have the descendants, and we also need to be prepared for a return. And in a couple of ways. I mean, you could have a recreation of giants. Not all the angels are in the abyss.
Right.
Only the impassioned and the most horrible of ones went to the abyss. So they could start recreating new giants at any point in time. They know their time is short. Or we're going to see ones that have survived somehow, some way that might show up. We need to be open to this. What's also interesting is we need to be understanding that there's going to be some sort of demon impact here as well of the disembodied giants. Because in Daniel 2, I think verse 42 in the metallic prophecy, you have in the last empire, you have the descendants of these beast empires that come from the giants. And I walked through that completely in the second book. You have some of these kings who are going to intermix their seed or commingle their seed with the children of men, with humankind. So there's two different races that are going on, and you can interpret that as either a physical interaction, or you can, as you take that back to Hebrew, you can understand that as a demonic possession, as a demon going into one of these kings and providing the additional power, just as you were talking about with Antichrist earlier. And then you have something that's interesting in the time of Armageddon, where the false prophet and Antichrist have these demons come out of their mouth to gather the world's armies to Armageddon. You can also translate that as what it is, but also as it's coming out of their mouths because he's commanding these demons.
Yeah.
And when you understand that, then you can say, well, maybe the image of the Antichrist will actually be operated by demons with that oiketerion I was talking about.
Yeah, and we're going to be seeing an increase in that, as we get closer to the time of tribulation, until we get closer to the time of the 7-year tribulation. Yeah, we're going to see an increase in that.
Yeah, and then I have a document as well that I have on the mighty ones of the end time. So I'll link Greek references back to terminology in the Old Testament and help you sort of understand how the bloodlines and the giants all sort of come together in those terms of the great and mighty ones of the book of Revelation.
Nice. Well, as I really want to thank you. This is a topic that I absolutely love digging into. I'm going to put the link again to your website up there, so everybody can go over there. And he does have on his website, guys, if you go over to the book, you drop it down, you'll see that he's got, parts of the book that you can go over and you can take a look at. Are you still accepting friend requests on Facebook?
When I get a chance to look at them.
Hit the limit.
Yeah. Well, I haven't hit the limit only because I try and keep some open. But I haven't looked at accepting for a bit. I'll probably do another look here over the next couple of weeks and accept some more.
But there is a group. Now, is that your group? Just a minute. Let me pull it up here because I posted on it yesterday. And I didn't look. Where is it? I did not look.
There is a group that's called Gary Wayne and the Genesis 6 Conspiracy.
Yeah, that's the one I'm looking at. Is that your group?
Yep. Well, I didn't start the group. I try and be active in it. I haven't been, as I've been trying to finish the book up, but typically I'm quite active in that group. So I'll answer questions and stuff, and post in there regularly and put the interviews that I do up in there.
Yeah, that's where I posted this one yesterday. And I've been a member of this group, well, on this account just recently, but I've I've lost 2 other accounts on Facebook as well. So yeah, it's just, but yeah. All right. Well, Gary, thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me, and hopefully we raised a little bit of curiosity in the audience, and maybe they'll dig a little bit deeper into things, because I think it's going to be really important. So I appreciate the opportunity to talk to your audience.
We welcome you back anytime. If you're free and you get that book dropped, come on back and we can talk some more.
Absolutely. I'd come back anytime, Laurie.
Awesome. Thank you, Gary. Ernie, you've been quiet.
Oh, I've been taking everything in tonight.
I know you have. All right. So we're not sure if we're going to be back on Sunday or not, but if not, we will be back next week. We also have Big John for next Wednesday again. We're going to continue talking about, again, the Giants. We're going to talk about the Mudflood Tartaria conspiracy, you might say. We're going to continue that discussion as well on Wednesday with Big John. So, yeah. All right, guys. I want to thank everybody in our chat room tonight. I want to thank all of our moderators. And look at, we put out this information again. We say this all the time. We put this information out here for your benefit. Do not believe anything we say. Do as the Bible says. Study to show thyself approved. Test all things. We put enough links in the description area for you guys to be able to do that. We back up everything we say here. And please take advantage of going over to Gary's website. And if you don't buy a book, just go over there and read, and use his information as a possible stepping stone, so you can, get that get the knowledge and pass it down to your family. We do this not to spread fear, because fear is not of the Father, but we do this again so you and yourself and your family can be educated. And we will see you next time. Like I said, it might be Sunday. If not, it will be next Wednesday. And until next time, guys, eyes open, no fear. God bless.